In this lesson, I'm providing an example of how you can create a focus off effect for the input, and if this is a valid web URL, then we're going to add it to the output and add a hyperlink value to the output. So when we type into here, if we have a web address and we remove focus off the input element, it will create a hyperlink that's going to link out to the path indicated within the input field, and then of course clear out the input field content. We're going to do a regular expression in order to check for valid web URL. If you enter something that's not a valid web URL, it's just going to go red. We also have an option that we can customize this as needed. So if we want to remove out the contents of the text content for the link, if it's wrong, we can do that as well, where we can clear that full content. So if it's wrong, we're clearing out any of the content. If it's right, it's going to work. If it's wrong, it just removes out that element, and then we can update and add it again afterwards. Created an HTML page and outputting it on the right hand side within the browser window. So we've got two elements there. We've got the div where we're going to have the output being placed, and then we've got an input field where we can take in some content that we can update onto the page. Let's also make a selection of these elements. So I'll just give it a class so it's easier to select, and do the myinput and link it to a JavaScript file. And so setting up the source, I'm going to create a new file called app17.js for this example. And now let's create that new file on the same folder directory and select the page element content. So we've got an element with a class of output. So let's select that into an object. So it's in a usable format, and we're selecting the element with a class of output into an object, and the variable name is going to be output. And then also we want to select the element with a class of input, and that's going to be the myinput and document. Now of course you don't have to give the variable names the same as the classes. I'm just doing that so that we can easily identify them within the JavaScript code. So that gives us both the elements. So what we want to do is track an event on the input field, and as we're typing, once we click off of that input field, then we want to be able to update the output content with the contents of that input field. So let's update the myinput, and also going to set an attribute, and the attribute of the placeholder, add URL, as we're expecting a URL within that field. And we're also going to set the myinput, so you can have even a starting value if you want as well, because we're expecting a web page address. So you can even have a starting value as HTTP. So let the user come in and then continue to fill out the rest of the value. And then once they click off, we want to generate that value and add it to the page. So let's add an event listener to myinput. And adding the event listener, the event that we're going to be listening for is going to be the focus out. So this is whenever the user takes focus out of the input field, then we want to fire off the event, and we can just make an anonymous event directly within the event listener. So once that gets selected, then we're going to set the attribute. So we'll create an element within the output area. And we can also populate content from a link. So if we already do create a link within the output area, so we can do it that way as well. Or we can code this with HTML and select the element from the page. So there's a few options here. I'm just going to create an anchor tag, and then for the link, and actually I'm going to name it my link, so we don't get any confusion that for the link. So for the link itself, let's add in some text content. And right now the text content is going to be blank for the link. We want to append it to the output element. So selecting the my link, appending it to the output element. And for my link, let's set the attribute. And the attribute of the href can be that specific value. And that's actually going to be getting the value from that myInput value whenever we trigger off the focus out. And we're also going to be updating the text content of the link. So text content, and for now we can also use the value of the input. So let's populate a URL here, and then when we click off of it, that takes the focus out, triggers our event. Our event, what it does is it sets the attribute of the href for the link to be the same value as the input field, and then updates the text content to be the value of the input field. So now this is actually a clickable link that's going to bring us to the website that was indicated there. Let's also update the my link, and we'll also set an attribute. So the attribute that we want to set is going to be the target. So set that to blank. And now this one doesn't have to change, so we can set it globally as the attribute for the element. And when we focus out, that creates that element with the target. If we do an inspect within the console tools, we'll see that output has now the hyperlink that's going to that web page. You can also do a regular expression check just to make sure that it is a valid URL before updating. So I'm actually going to copy and paste a regular expression. So this is going to be quite long there. And there's a number of them that you can find on the internet. So that's the regular expression. And with the regular expression, we can run a test of the URL to make sure that this is a valid URL. So run a test of the myInput value. So check to see if the regex test, and this is going to return back a result. So we want to test out the result of my value, and it'll do a condition. So if it is a valid web URL, then we're good. And if not, then what we can do is we can do the my link and style color, and we'll set the color to be red. And actually we'll do the background color. And it's actually not going to be the link, it's going to be the myInput that we want to set the background color to. So whenever it's not a valid web URL, it's going to go red. If this is a valid web URL, it's going to automatically add and run the code. So we also want to do a clear of that content. So set the background color back to white. And we'll also remove out the current content and reset it back to this HTTP value. So let's try it. And when we click off, it takes the web URL. If we don't have a web URL, it'll just go red until it actually detects a web URL, and then at that point it will update that value. We can also simplify the content that we're outputting into the text content. So let's create a simple version. Simple title, and using the content from the my value. So we can do a string replace using the string replace method for string methods in JavaScript. So we want to select the value and then run the replace. And what we want to search for, so the HTTP : // and we're just going to replace it with a blank. So let's try that again and click off. And now instead of the myInput value, we'll put as the simple title. And try that one more time. And we click off of it. So that gives us without the HTTP. So for the link, but the link obviously for the href, we're still using the full value that we had within the input area. So these are some of the customizations that you can apply. You can also apply different styling. So if you want the myInput style and color, so you can set that to be white. And if it worked, then we can set that color back to be black. So it goes red, and let's double check. So make sure that it goes black. I'm going to click off of it.